Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Keenan and CASBO, I want to welcome and thank you all for joining us this morning. The unfortunate tragedy in Connecticut on December 14th was a very somber reminder for all of us about how important it is for schools to be prepared for the unthinkable. Many of us wonder if a tragedy like that can happen at one of our schools, and we saw last week that it can. There's a 16-year-old student that opened fire, shooting a classmate and injuring 2 others at Taft Union High School. These unfortunate events are reminders of how important it is to develop crisis response plans and how important it is to review and update emergency preparedness strategies. Student safety is a priority for all of you on this webinar. It's also very important to both Keenan and CASBO, which is why we've teamed up to provide all California schools a series of online courses as well as this informative webinar at no cost. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Scott Poland with us today. Dr. Poland has over 25 years experience as a school psychologist. He is a recognized expert in the area of school crisis and has authored many books and material on the subject, including the Keenan Safe Schools Aftermath of Tragedy course. Dr. Poland has been involved in the aftermath of a number of school shootings across the United States, and he's going to speak to us today about school shootings, common myths, warning signs, how best to prevent school shootings, and then how to deal with the aftermath of tragedy. So Dr. Poland, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn the webinar back over to you, and we'll take questions and answers at the end.
Thank you, Christine, and indeed it is my pleasure to have a chance to talk with everyone today about such an important topic. And I'm going to begin with aftermath and the most common things that, of course, we deal with in the schools or when we've lost a staff member or a student to an accident. And the numbers in terms of the children that die every year are really quite staggering, and I'm sure that most of the audience today has sadly had to deal with the aftermath of a student at their particular school. And I'd like you to just take a moment and look at a scenario. It's one that I dealt with when working as the Director of Psychological Services in Texas. But basically imagine that it is Friday night. We are beginning the 2-week holiday vacation, and the principal has called because he or she is at the hospital. And unfortunately, a 9th grader borrowed a scooter, didn't really know how to operate it, ran a stop sign, was hit and killed, rushed to the hospital, but could not be saved. And lots of classmates in today's world, because communications travel quickly with text messages today. In fact, it's really important for school personnel to huddle up quickly and decide what we need to figure out, verify what's happened, take action, because meanwhile, all the kids in the school are getting text messages. So the principal had called really to say large numbers of students have gathered at the hospital. The young man has been pronounced dead. The students are all being told they need to disperse and leave because they're creating chaos, and he's asking for help. And, you know, and this is the situation that many school counselors, social workers are in terms of how do we respond. And I'd like everybody to be thinking about what would you do on a Friday night with a 2-week holiday? What do you think is appropriate, and is it really necessary to reach out at that particular moment? And I also want to say to everyone that I don't think there's anything as a perfect crisis response. It's really all about doing something and collaborating with other people and having group decisions. And what I remember saying to the principal was, well, what are the students saying? And he said, the students are all planning to go gather at a park. Well, in the evening, that didn't seem like a very good idea. And we pretty quickly came up with the idea that we would open up the school, because that is a place that everybody could be notified. That's where the gathering will be. That's where there will be assistance provided. And then I found out that the young man who had been killed was also on one of the sports teams. And what that meant is booster club, an athletics network. And we talked about how we could try to make as many parents as possible aware of what has happened. And then I encouraged him to get across to all students, let your parents know what's happened, and meet us all at the school in a few minutes. And as it turns out, when I was on the way to the school, he actually called me again on my cell phone. And by the way, it is very important that school personnel make certain that their principal has the cell phone, especially the support personnel, because decisions do get made quickly, and we want support personnel to have input in that decision making. And there had been a change of plans. The family that actually owned the scooter had a very large home. Many of the affected children lived in that neighborhood, and so that's where the intervention was moved. And I'll never forget a couple of things of being involved there. One, it was when I walked into that home, and there were probably about 150 people there, having someone say, "Thank goodness you're here, and let me gather the students for you." And I felt a lot of pressure, as I know that everybody feels when something sad has happened at school in terms of what to do. And we all need to basically give ourselves a little pep talk that we can do it, we've had training, we're going to work collaboratively with others, we'll do the best we possibly can, we care. And I remember saying, well, let me start with the parents, because that's actually the easiest. I mean, I can tell you what the questions are going to be from parents, like, is this going to have a significant impact on my son or my daughter? They were planning to go out of town for the next couple of days. Do I let them go? Do I need to be there for them? Do I need to go to the funeral? My son's grandmother is really seriously ill and might pass away any day. Is that going to make this all harder for him? And of course, the answers to all those questions are definitely yes. Then after finishing with the parents, all the students were gathered, and imagine about 60 to 70 students all in a room on the floor, and I'm madly trying to figure out what to say to them, because the concern I have is we often have the adults do what I call talking at students as opposed to talking with them. And I really recommend putting desks in a circle, sitting in a circle, sitting on the floor with them. And guess what? The less the adults actually say, and the more we listen, and the more we get the students talking, the better an intervention is going to go. But as I'm thinking of all those things, a lady comes walking into the room, and she's carrying a 4-year-old girl, and she has a picture. And you've probably all figured out who this is. It took me a moment to realize that's the mom. This lady lives down the street, and her son was killed. And of course, I introduced myself and expressed sincerely my sorrow at the loss of her son. And then I said, you obviously are here, and you want to say some things. And she did. And she immediately showed all the students the picture of her son, Larry, and said, this is how I'm going to remember Larry. Larry was smiling. And if you're all wondering, we're not blaming anyone for this accident. I've all been thinking about what can we do in Larry's memory. And we know that Larry loved golf, and we're going to do some things to help underprivileged children learn to play golf. And then she said, you're teenagers, and I know that you like to talk to each other, but it's really important that you not shut your parents out. Dr. Poland has already talked to them about the importance of listening and really being there for you. Please promise me that you will talk with your parents about what's happened. And periodically she was patting her daughter, and then, she said, we have a funeral to plan. We have family coming in from out of town. Give us 24 hours, but please let us stay involved in your life. And then she asked if she could lead everybody in the Lord's Prayer. And then she did. And she reminded them all of don't shut your parents out and get the help you need. And really, as a psychologist, there wasn't too much left for me to do. I mean, I could go on at length about other things we did do, and the opening the school and the being there at the funeral and things that were done in his memory. But I have the really simple thought that I want to share with you, and that is, that was a number of years ago. His little sister would now be 11 years old. She would have started either 6th grade, probably, and I wonder if her school counselor has any idea what happened to her older brother 7 years ago. And I wonder how the family is doing. And I know that the anniversary of that tragedy, which happened to be on December 19th, will forever be a difficult time for the family. And I want to really move on and talk a little bit about a couple of key points and the leading causes of death for children in this country: accidents, homicide, and then number 3, suicide. And we know there are protective factors that have been outlined by the World Health Organization. Those have to do with being connected in school and having stable families and having mental health services available and not having lethal means such as guns readily accessible. And of course, I'm hoping that all of the school personnel listening are very aware of a task force at their district that's continually looking at school safety. And one of the things about school safety and school crisis planning is, in my opinion, it's never a done deal. And if a school system nearby has a new program, has some good ideas, we need to figure out what those are so that we keep up with the current best practices and what are the trends and what might be different about school safety today. There was a gentleman by the name of Gerald Kaplan, and this, in all of my writings, are really based on, as a foundation, Kaplan's levels of crisis intervention. Basically, he has said primary prevention is the first level. And the question is really this simple, and that would be, where are our prevention programs to prevent accidental deaths, which most often are car accidents, bicycle accidents, or drowning? And I do believe schools can provide a leadership role and partner with community to implement prevention programs. And where are prevention programs to reduce the homicides in this country that affect our students and our children? And at this point, I mean, I need to say that the tragedy in Newtown is, just staggering. But we do have to realize that schools do remain one of the safest places that children in our country go. In fact, it's very sad, but the majority of children in our country are actually murdered in their own homes. But we do need to be thinking about anger management, impulse control, better mental health, restricting gun access to people that clearly have mental health issues. Although I learned a long time ago to be careful about what I say about guns. And what I want to say at this moment is it's really a question of responsibility. The adults that have the right to purchase the gun must be responsible and safeguard that gun from an angry, depressed, troubled, substance-abusing person that might use it to injure themselves or someone else. So we have the question of the prevention programs in terms of accidents, homicides, and suicide. Then we have secondary intervention. This is what most people think of when crisis intervention is discussed. And they think about what was done in the first half an hour, the first hour, the first afternoon, the first day. What was the initial intervention to try to manage all the emotionality? And it's a very important aspect, but it's not the only part of Kaplan's model. So the focus really also needs to be on what he called tertiary intervention in terms of what might the affected individuals need 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years later. Where is the long-term assistance? And I'd have to honestly say, in working in the schools for all those years, and really in our society, we don't necessarily have good long-term follow-up. And we're going to be talking in a few minutes about what percentage of individuals might need the long-term follow-up. Back to a couple of key facts in the beginning. Very important that we have correct information. I remember getting a call one day from my secretary was saying, there's been a death of so-and-so. She was a teacher at the high school. And then I got a call back a few minutes later that no, in fact, it was a different individual. So what we really have to do is double check, triple check, make sure we have the facts. We can get the facts from the police. We can get the facts from the affected family. I also remember many times talking with the principal and saying, really, we need to get in a car. We need to go to the home. We need to meet with the family. We need to offer our condolences and support. We need to find out exactly what has happened. And many times on those visits, we would meet the surviving sibling. And imagine that your sister, 1 year older, same school, has died by suicide. And all of the things that the surviving sibling would be going through, all of their worries about what's happening in school, how do I go back and face everybody, what do I say, what do I do? So that outreach to the family initially is really important. And we've got to know the facts. The other thing that I believe strongly, we have to tell the truth. We need to tell the truth to everyone in developmentally appropriate language, but we must tell the truth. We can deal with the truth. I don't care how bad it is. We can't deal with rumor and innuendo. And I could give you examples where the administrator's announcement or letter to the parents, you know, it sort of alluded to what has happened, but it's really simplest. Just tell the truth. We don't have to name the student involved. We can just say, sadly, a 9th grader who attended our school died in an accident, or their death was by suicide, and our school offers these resources, and here's what to do if you were concerned about your child. And if you're not sure whether or not the death was a suicide, because I believe we have to have the facts, go meet with the family, find out. And several times I've explained to the parents who lost their child to suicide why it is best for everyone to acknowledge what's happened. Then we can deal with, you know, the best ways to support their classmates and the friends. We can focus more on suicide prevention. And there's an excellent resource that has just come out within the last year from the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. It is After a Suicide Toolkit for Schools, and there's one of the websites where it's available, and I did have a role in helping to develop that. I've already mentioned most of the points that are on this particular slide in terms of having a meeting, the administrator getting the crisis team together, and I cannot overemphasize how important it is for there to be ongoing planning and meeting with crisis teams so that people aren't surprised, for example, oh, you mean I'm on the crisis team? I'm supposed to do what? So the importance of assigning responsibilities. And we also want to have the administrator be supportive and empowering, to basically be, I know we're going to get through this, we're going to work together. And I want to give you an example, and it was a staggering tragedy in Houston. Unfortunately, the dad killed the entire family, and it included 3 little girls that attended an elementary school. So at the meeting before school, the principal basically said to everyone, this will be the worst day that you've ever spent in education. I mean, I know it's going to be a difficult day, but I don't think you get the best out of everyone by telling them this is going to be one of the worst days of your lives. So when I got a chance to talk, I emphasized teamwork, pulling together. We need to help the faculty first and help each other, and then we're going to do a good job of reaching out to our students. The other point I'd like to make early on today is often schools do a lot of great things in response to a crisis situation, but they fail to have meetings where they basically go over what worked the best, what didn't work so well, how can we improve our management in the future, but most importantly, is there anything we can do to prevent tragedies like this from ever occurring again? I also, speaking honestly, believe schools often underestimate the impact of a tragedy. And when they pull crisis teams together, they tend to, I mean, here's a common statement from a school crisis team. We went there, you know, they called for extra help from around our school system. I think we did some good things, but I was only there one afternoon or one day, and really I never get the chance to go back because of all my other duties. And of course, the good news here is that most people really recover pretty well from a crisis. Most people get the support they need, and they don't need more than maybe an initial supportive activity or two, but some people do need ongoing assistance. And a school crisis is simply not over in 1 or 2 days. And I've already mentioned points about the cell phone, but I want to take a moment to talk about what's called the calling tree. Here's an example. I was on the phone with my own son's high school principal. It's 10 o'clock at night on a school night. And she's saying, Scott, you want me to use the calling tree? Tell all the high school faculty tonight about this triple murder that took the lives of one of our students? And I'm like, yes, Jody, you need to tell them tonight. That'll give them a chance to work through their own issues, to get the help they need, turn to their significant other, and very importantly, you can let them know that we're going to have a faculty meeting at 6:30 tomorrow morning before school starts to go over the plan for the day and how to assist our students. By the way, the young man who was murdered and a student at that high school was a swimmer. You know how early swimmers get to school to practice? Yes, that's right. That's when you need to be there, 5:30, to work with the kids on the swim team and give them the help they need. Now, I talked earlier about empowering and being positive about we're going to all support each other. And one of the experiences that I've literally had hundreds of times is be the person that is asked to talk to the faculty before school. And I mentioned a couple of examples of that, but one of the things that I often say is this: the very things that made you want to work in education, because you care about children so much, those are the things that are going to help you today. You know, I remember working with Columbine teachers and basically saying to them, let your heart be your guide. In your heart, I think you have really good ideas about what the students need, and they need opportunities to talk about it, write about it, artwork, project, music, ceremonies. So very important to help the faculty first with their particular issues and then hopefully empower them. And there's all of you have heard the flight attendants say this when there's a problem with the oxygen level in the cabin. Whose mouth does the oxygen mask go over first, yours or your small child? And actually, I'm amazed at how many people say the small child. But I think everybody listening today knows it goes over the mom or the dad's mouth first. How do we actually help children the most after a tragedy? By training, empowering, and supporting their teachers and their parents. And entering a classroom, it's particularly difficult, and I do believe that the intervention should largely be done in classrooms, and you send your best support personnel to help teachers in classrooms. Teachers hopefully have been trained ahead of time, and they have in their teacher handbook tips for dealing with the crisis, tips for managing emotionality, how to help students after sad and tragic things have happened. So they've been trained on it. They've had a faculty meeting before school. They heard the news as quickly as possible so they could process what had happened and work through some of their own issues. And then we send our best people into classrooms where we would expect the students to be most affected. And the desks are in a circle. And I think too often we have a tendency for the counseling staff to just like, well, I'm here, I'm available, I'm in my office if anybody wants to talk to me. And I think it's much more about being in hallways and approaching affected students. It's about being in classrooms and sitting down. And as a psychologist, because very often we were itinerant and we traveled to lots of different schools, and so I didn't know the person that tragically has been lost. So what would I say? I would just simply acknowledge, I didn't know your friend, Sheila. I've heard a lot of good things about her. I'd like to hear more. I've helped other children when sad things have happened. I'd like the opportunity to help you. Mostly, I'm here to listen. And what I have often found is kids have a lot of questions. And again, that goes back to giving them the facts, telling them the truth. Then they want to reminisce about their lost classmate or friend. And that's the time when we can write a lot of things down, put them in a card or poster or things that we can make for the family. And then eventually they're going to get around to talking about their own losses. And the number of children in this country that have had trauma and have lost people significant to them is certainly a lot. And sometimes it's like, wow, I mean, so much has happened, and how are we really going to deal with all of this? And developmentally, the younger the child, the less verbalization there's going to be, the more it's about artwork, poster board, markers, what can we make? Here are some questions for you to be thinking about when we do have the tragic death of someone in the school community. And these are just a guide, really, to estimate the amount of emotionality, how many extra counselors we might need, etc. Who was the person? Were they a popular, beloved member of the school community? Or here's a quick example. One time it was like, well, gee, Scott, she just moved here from Odessa, Texas 3 days ago. Hardly a ripple here. Where does the intervention need to be back in Odessa? What happened to them? Everybody listening today would know somebody who died of cancer, and hopefully you had weeks or months to slowly get used to the idea you might lose your loved one. But when it's an accident, when it is a homicide, when it is a suicide, it's sudden, violent, unexpected, much more difficult to deal with. Then obviously when the death occurs at school, it's much more traumatic. And the question I always ask when I get calls for consultations is, okay, but before this tragedy you're calling me about, what else has your school experienced? Because sometimes there's unresolved issues left over from the last tragedy. And who was the perpetrator? When they were a known member of the school community, we have to realize it's going to be very complicated. And you know, really, if we were to go back about 2 decades, most school violence was from outside the school, not from a current student or a former student. Then we had a long period of time where most school violence and most school shootings were actually committed by students at their own school. And of course, the Newtown incident, again, would be an example of an outsider. So we have to be prepared for violence from outside as well as violence that comes from inside our school community. Here are a couple thoughts about the administrative role, and I'm not going to go over every single one of those except to say that they play a very key role in terms of organizing, supporting, telling the truth, keeping other schools that might be affected as well as central administration aware of what's happened. I also think it's good when an administrator is willing to show a little emotion, and in so doing, they give permission for everybody to have some emotions. So those are a couple points about administrators, and let's look at a couple of others. I already talked about the example of contacting the parents of the deceased. It's important that administrators know local resources. And one person that I really admire, about a year ago, I was asked to travel to Brazil, where sadly a tragic school shooting occurred, where a young man returned to the middle school he had attended, and he killed 23 students. The principal, Luis, here are some of the things he said. We realize we're in this for the long haul. We are not going to turn away any sources of assistance. We have counseling and psychological staff. We actually have 3 shifts of them available for the morning, the afternoon, and the evening to work with our children and our families. We realize the importance of getting school reopened as quickly as possible, getting students back in a routine, and recognizing schools and school personnel are really the greatest source of assistance that most children have. We have plans for the summer because school will be out only in about 3 weeks. So it was like he had so many great ideas, and he also talked about mapping, which I will explain to you in just a moment. But it was amazing that it's like, I don't know where he got his training, but I do believe around the world, school personnel have greatly increased their ability to respond to aftermath and tragic deaths at school. And then he also said, we know that we will not be focusing on the perpetrator. We may never have the answers why, because that perpetrator also died by suicide at that school. And the focus needs to be on getting everyone the help that they need and not on trying to answer the why question. And we talked about what is called the 60-20-20 rule. And what do we mean by that? And where did I get this? Some training from psychologists in Israel. Here's what they say. 60% of us, no matter how staggering the tragedy, with our existing support system, our family, our faith, our friends, we're going to be okay. 20% minor problems. 20% major problems. And the real question is, how do we identify those with major problems, as well as how do we make sure they get the ongoing help? I wonder if anybody is aware of the Columbine basketball star. His name was Greg Barnes. He seemed to have everything in the world going for him. Popular, smart, phenomenal basketball player. I'm very sorry to tell you that he died by suicide on the very first anniversary of the Columbine massacre. We know that we have had a problem with suicide in the aftermath of school shootings. And we should realize when we have these mass casualty school shootings, we should be implementing and adding to our existing suicide prevention programs. So a couple of other points for the administrator in terms of really staying focused on the crisis, being there to support staff, students, and especially the crisis team. And I do remember one example shared with me, and the school counselors and crisis team swear that the administrator made this announcement over the PA system. I know that you're all saddened by the death of Bubba on his way to school this morning, but unfortunately, our counselors are all away for training, and if you will just hold your emotions until Monday, I know that they will be there to help you. And I think everybody listening realized the importance of an immediate response, and he should have been calling and getting the counselors back or bringing in additional ones. Now, roles for the support personnel, what I really hope is that they basically are the right-hand person, that the school principal really would not make decisions about a lot of things we've been talking about today without at least getting input from the support personnel. Every student, every staff member has their own unique history with regards to crisis and loss, and we need to recognize that. And if we have a teacher whose husband died of a heart attack a couple of weeks ago, and now they've had a student die, well, obviously, that's a teacher that's going to need a lot of support and one of our best trained individuals coming into their classrooms. And then I already mentioned, and I've had to do this myself, which is give a little pep talk about, I can do this. I've had training, I've helped people before, I'm going to collaborate, I'm going to work with everyone, and I can do it, which is the message that we all have to have. We can do it. We can be there to support our students. This is a time when we should not hesitate to be calling parents. I've never found them more appreciative. And by the way, I don't call them and say, oh, well, I hope it was okay. I talked to your son today. I'm a psychologist. I normally would have had your written permission. In fact, in an emergency situation, we don't need any permission at all. We need to be calling them and basically, here's who I am. You must know what's happened. How can we work together to help your child? And then it is important to keep records, especially when we have brought in extra support from either the community or even just our own schools, like meet with them. Who are you the most concerned about? Who do you meet with? What do we need to do for follow-up? So we do ensure that those the most affected get additional help. This next slide really summarizes a lot of points I've been making already, and I'm not going to go over those points again in the interest of time, but we set the tone, and the administrator helped set that tone that we're going to do everything possible. A wise superintendent once said to me, Scott, we know that the crisis becomes the curriculum. We'll take the cue from our students about when we're going to get back to the math and the reading work. So also important that we all know the developmental stages and understanding of death, although there's some debate about this, but Piaget outlined this, and here's the bottom line. We can't really be confident that children truly understand the permanence and finality of death until they're around the age of about 12. And it's like there's nothing you say to a 4-year-old and they automatically understand, I'll never see this person on this earth again as we know it. And I do believe school personnel can be helping prepare students for funerals, and it's pretty common to attend a funeral for a student and you're like wondering, where are all of the parents? Because it appears that somebody just pulled up in a van and dropped off like 10 kids. We really want children to go through the funeral process with their parents that are there to support them every step of the way. Now, this is what's called the Circles of Vulnerability model, and I believe it has applications for almost any tragedy that affects the school. There are 3 circles. The first one is geographic proximity, and obviously some students might have been right there. They were in the car when somebody died. They were the first car to come across the scene. They were in the classroom where somebody, fell and died and hit their head, or they suffered a heart attack, or tragically, they were in the classroom where the shooting occurred. But then you see it goes out a little further. So who would be in the classroom next door? Who would be down the hall? Who is downstairs? Who is in the building next door? Who is totally outside of the disaster area? Then we have what's called the population at risk. This is what I was referring to when I said everybody has a crisis history. Well, somebody might have lost another close friend or loved one to that exact cause of death. They lost their older brother in a car accident. Now they've lost a classmate or a friend in a car accident yesterday. Or they've had other losses, or perhaps they're going through a difficult personal crisis. Maybe their parents are divorcing. Maybe they have broken up with their long-term partner. So population at risk. Our third circle is called psychosocial proximity. And notice the most critical part of this is when you lose someone in your immediate family, or they were like your very best friend. And then it goes out a little further to them just being an acquaintance or somebody you know, but they weren't particularly close to you. Now, what's the most important point that I'd like to get across to you? It's really this simple. Where is the overlap? think of this as like a psychological triage. Being honest, schools don't like to think this way. If you think this way, your crisis response is not over in 1 or 2 days. But who would re-triage as at highest risk? They were right there when he died. He was their very best friend, and their mom is dying of cancer right now, or their older brother was killed 6 months ago. So I've found this model very helpful, but I've generally found schools resistant to really using it. I already made some points about funerals, so they're contained on this particular slide. But kind of to summarize, what the literature really say about how children respond to a tragic event? Well, it's really very simple. They have a fear of the future. They often have nightmares and sleeping problems. They regress academically. They regress behaviorally. Quick example. 15-year-old boy found his 14-year-old sister hanging to death in the closet last night. So now we're meeting with the young man's parents. Let's call him Tom. Mom says, he asked us for a nightlight last night. We told him absolutely not. You're 15, you don't need a nightlight. The mom and dad let him have a nightlight. This is a normal response. Believe me, it will not be on in a year. Now let's pick it up 5 weeks later. The counselor and I are meeting with all of Tom's teachers. They say one at a time, I don't understand this. He's so smart. He's failing my class. He's failing all of his classes. And the counselor and I are reminding them, don't you remember? Tom found his sister dead 5 weeks ago. Can't we do something besides fail him in every class? So I do believe that we have to look at some academic accommodations, understanding, and realize what children have gone through. And school personnel, they are keys, especially the teachers, in helping us understand, wow, who's really having a PTSD reaction? Who still has the numbness? Who has the startle response? Who really experienced intense fear and the thought that they could have actually been killed? And it's really all about whether those symptoms persist over several months. And if so, we all have to argue and really lobby to get them the help that they need. Primary resiliency factors, and what is it that enables one kid to bounce back and somebody else doesn't do so well? It's really all about having caring and support, loving family and friends, positive view of themselves, positive outlook for the future, using those problem-solving skills, being comfortable managing and venting strong emotions. And resiliency is really a learned behavior, because I'm sure everybody listening can think of somebody who did bounce back, but you could also think of somebody who really didn't do too well. It was like their life was pretty much over in terms of happiness and the future. These next couple of slides are a couple of thoughts about, because it has to be on everyone's minds, about how can we prevent these tragic school shootings. And a lot of it involves parents paying attention, parents limiting adolescent privacy and knowing what kind of things they're posting, knowing what's going on in their rooms, and also when your child has misbehaved, as all kids misbehave, we really need to let them experience consequences. Too often, parents lie to try to avoid consequences for their child, and I do believe when this happens that the problems get bigger with kids as they get older. And when the school personnel are telling you there is a problem, I always like to emphasize that I have the utmost respect for school personnel, and they have devoted their careers to education and helping children. No, they do not have it in for your child. They sincerely are trying to help, And when they make recommendations that you need to increase supervision, you need to get help, please do so. Other pretty obvious points that are being debated at the highest levels have to do with our gun laws and access, media violence. What's the research say about media violence and excessive violent video games? And you do know that you could purchase one today where you would be the school shooter in the violent video game. What the research says is media violence affects children, case closed. The only good news is, thankfully, it appears to be small numbers of children that are actually affected. And we need to take all threats seriously. And I always get very concerned when one person at a school says something like, "Oh, I know this kid. I don't think they would actually harm anybody. Everybody get back to work. We don't really need to worry about it." Well, we have national recommendations that say every school should have a threat assessment team. And who should be on it? An administrator, of course, a teacher who knows the student in question well, a mental health representative, probably the counselor or the school psychologist, and either school or local law enforcement. And everybody together determines what information we need and then gather that information and make a wise decision. And by the way, threats really fall into two categories. What's called a transient threat, which is something made, a statement in the heat of the moment, in a moment of passion, like I'm going to get you, I'm going to beat you up, I'm going to kill you. But there's no long-standing grudge, there's no means, there's no planning, there's no forethought. But when we have a substantial threat, there's been a long-standing grudge. They definitely have made a plan. They have the means. And so schools need threat assessment teams, and there's a lot of excellent training and literature available at the Department of Education website. And one of the things getting attention right now is a program entitled ALICE. And one of the things, the C in ALICE stands for Confront the Gunman. There are people that are advocating charge at the gunman, throw your book bag, throw your books, throw your pencils, and our law enforcement agencies do not support such strategies. They would be recommending take students out of harm's way, do whatever you can to evacuate. The answer is not to charge at the gunman, but that is one of the strategies that is being promoted. The statement is anyone can stop a school shooting. What's that mean? The alertness of any one person, whether it be the parent, whether it be a student, and we could have an entire webinar on how do we get a commitment from students? How do we get them to step forward? How do we break through their thought that they should never, ever be a snitch, to use their particular word? And also in our schools, thankfully, we've had what are called near misses. What are those about? That means somebody made a hit list, and it was okay with their friends until they added the name of somebody they liked on the list. Then all of a sudden, thankfully, they are calling school authorities. I'm a big believer in safety pledges to do something about bullying, safety pledges to get a commitment from students about school safety, and perhaps at the simplest level, really to improve school safety, survey the students. I have all the information about what we need to do differently, where we need to improve our supervision. And certainly we need to plan and think about where would we evacuate to. We need to conduct lockdown drills, and I'm actually a big supporter of crisis drills. And those are in some of the 4 books that I have written. But the main point I'd like to make is we don't need to scare anybody. We don't need to have simulated gunfire. We don't need to have simulated blood. It's really all about this simple. Will the students listen to the nearest adult and do exactly what they say without questioning it? And we certainly need to dramatically increase the mental health services available in our schools. here's something, and I was the president of the National Association of School Psychologists a number of years ago. So we'll say something like this: 80% of the mental health services a student in this country gets, they get at school. Okay, that sounds pretty good until you actually work in schools. And then you realize the hundreds and hundreds of kids, maybe 500 to 700 students for every school counselor, maybe one school psychologist to every 2,500 students. I think with those numbers, you immediately realize very few of them get the counseling they need, and so often the counselors, well-meaning, but they're involved in all kinds of academic testing today. So, and school psychologists, for the most part, are usually working only with special education referrals. So more mental health services in our schools, and certainly more mental health services affordable, nearby, and efficiently delivered in our communities. I'm also a very big believer that school security officers, or SROs, are very important. I'm a big believer in surveillance cameras. I understand some schools need metal detectors, but I would also argue, where's our curriculum that addresses anger management, and where are our increased personnel to provide the mental health services? And I'm a really big believer in what I call the 4th R. I wrote an article on it for the School Board Journal. Basically, the 4th R is relationships. And we need to build relationships with all students. And we need to make sure they are connected and they like the school and the people in it, so that we would never have students that feel grievously wronged and angry and feel like the school is a place that they should literally blow up. So those are the statements that I wanted to share with you today, and I tried to allow a little bit of time to see if we have any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Poland. We did receive a few questions, which I will forward over to Dr. Poland. Before we do, we have a brief disclaimer that we're required to read. Keenan Associates is not an insurance brokerage or consulting firm. It's not a law firm or an accounting firm. We do not give legal advice or tax advice, and neither this presentation or the answers provided during the question and answer period, nor the documents that will accompany this presentation, constitute or should be construed as legal or tax advice. You're advised to follow up with your own legal counsel or tax advisor to discuss how this information affects you. We did receive quite a few questions. We've got time perhaps for a few of them. Dr. Poland, one of the questions that came in was around the crisis team that you mentioned and how important that is. And what should a school district do that does not have a crisis team in place?
Well, sometimes one person can be the difference in actually getting this done. And, you know, smaller districts might have one crisis team for the entire district. Large schools could have their own crisis team. But it really takes the superintendent and the school board, you know, deciding we need to do this, and then designating key people that are going to have roles in terms of communication and media and parents and counseling and you know, campus. So I think it has to come from the top. And I guess I find it very surprising that a school district would not have this in place. I think what we've battled for really about a decade is complacency. Most school districts put something in place, but it might only be on paper and not really have much meaning to the day-to-day conducting of schools.
Okay, thank you. The next question that we have is there's a lot of talk about having more guns in school or having guns in school, making schools safer. What do you think of the idea of having guns in school?
I am totally opposed. I do know that lots of guns injure and kill people accidentally. I think it would create incredible, you know, difficulties for schools in trying to supervise and make absolutely certain that You know, nobody has access to the gun except the person that has the weapons permit. I was just aware of an example last week where the teacher had the right to bring a gun to school, but they left it somewhere and a student came along and picked it up. I don't believe guns in schools are the answer at all. I also am aware of simulations and things that have taken place that have indicated that when somebody pulls the gun to try to shoot the bad guy, they're very likely to injure other people as well. So I'm totally opposed, and this comes up every time after high-profile school shootings, and it's not the answer.
Okay, thank you. We got another question about reporting requirements. And is there any reporting requirement for a depressed student who is found with a note threatening violence against a school or other students?
Great question. Now, there have been lawsuits when the threat has been about suicide and students have carried through and parents were not notified. I'm actually involved in a couple of those right now. So it's a little more clear-cut with regards to a suicide threat. This is why we need training, because I think the answer out there, everyone is thinking, wow, well, the administrator needs to know that, so there could be a proper assessment. And sadly, we've had situations where when we look back, glaring examples of violent writing, violent threats, turning in a violent project for the school assignment, and yet somehow the teacher didn't share that information. So I believe we need to cover this in training with school personnel and visit it every year, which is share this information, and it cannot wait. Share it right now with your administration.
Okay. We're getting a lot more questions about guns in schools, and I'm going to try to consolidate them into one question in the interest of time. But you had talked about not being a proponent of having schools with guns, but what about lasers in schools or having armed police officers in schools with the thought that at least the police officers are trained on how to respond and how to arrest and how to restrain?
Absolutely. I am always going to be for more police in schools. They certainly do have the training, and I support that. I do realize that that's only one approach. I'd like to balance that with a lot of things I've already talked about, and I also realize that having every school be able to afford their own police officer is probably not possible.
And what about the taser use? Would you support school districts having tasers?
Well, I think that, again, it'd have to be something a school board would decide, and there would be lots of training issues. Let's say that I would be, in my own opinion, adamant that arming school staff is not the answer with guns. I would at least be willing to look at some of the ramifications about tasers. And I suppose having it be something studied would be the appropriate response.
Perfect. All right, well, we are about out of time. We thank you very much, Dr. Pullen. This was a very informative and appreciated webinar. As Charlotte mentioned, we will be posting the recorded webinar to Keenan.com as well as to PNC Bridge. And Dr. Pullen has provided a handout that we will post as well entitled Dealing with Death, Tips for Building Principles in Managing Emotionality and Providing Support to Staff and Students. So that will be available online as well. So on behalf of Keenan, CASBO, and Dr. Pullen, we really want to thank everybody for participating today.